I returned home from a business trip 2 days earlier than planned, tired but happy that I would finally be able to sleep in my own bed, smell my own home, hear the floor creak under my feet, and maybe even give my daughter, whom I'd missed so much, a real hug. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by silence, not the cozy evening silence when someone is simply reading in the next room, but a tense, uneasy silence, as if the air in the house were holding still, and in that silence, I saw Nicole, my 9-year-old self, skinny, with golden strands escaping her braid, kneeling in the kitchen, a rag in her hands, red eyes, and a guilty look, as if she'd committed the crime of the century. She was mopping the floor, not just wiping, but mopping with a kind of desperate diligence, as if her future depended on it. I was taken aback, asked where everyone was, and she, without looking up, quietly replied that her grandparents had taken Diana, their own granddaughter, to an amusement park. And that she, Nicole, wasn't allowed to go because she was talking loudly at the table. I stood there in disbelief. My child, my only daughter, was left alone, at home, as punishment, with a bucket and a rag, because, you see, she was talking loudly at the table. At that moment, everything inside me froze, not from anger, no, but from some cold, crystal clarity. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply did what had to be done. And before we continue, I want to thank you. I'm so glad you're watching this video on my channel. Please let me know in the comments if you hear stories like this and remember someone in your life. Maybe yourself, someone close to you, or just a moment when everything suddenly changed. Write down the first thing that came to mind. The next morning, my phone kept ringing. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law, Diego, even Diana somehow found a way to call me from her childhood phone and say that everything was wrong, that Nicole herself was to blame, and I listened to all these calls and thought how strange. After all, I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd simply returned home early, I'd simply seen something I probably shouldn't have. Hi, my name is Gaia, I'm 35, I work in insurance and transform other people's disasters into neat, almost soulless reports and spreadsheets, where every person's pain is a clause, a signature, a damage amount, and a photo. Everything is settled, everything is by the book, with no room for emotion. People call me in a panic, talking about a fire, a flood, a death, and I simply write it down, describe it, document it. Please, no emotions, I usually say, and they fall silent, as if that eases their suffering. I lived the same way, carefully, calmly, without drama, in my life and at home, with the same dry professionalism, the same desire not to crumble under any emotional outburst, and it worked, for the most part, until it didn't. I have a daughter, Nicole. She's 9 years old, my little girl, my warm planet in the midst of everyday life, sweet, bright, a little shy, with a wild imagination and a habit of talking to toy horses, which she adores fanatically. She can spend hours sculpting funny creatures out of Play-Doh, sometimes with wings, sometimes with 2 tails, and inventing entire stories for them, as if a separate universe lived in her head. And in the evenings, when I finally get home, she lies down next to me and asks questions that would baffle any adult. Why aren't rainbows black and white? And is it true that Grandma Brenda is allergic to life itself? I laugh, answer as best I can, but mostly I just kiss her on the top of her head, because I don't know what to say. And Diego, yes, Diego, my husband, or rather, my ex-husband, 3 years ago, he also had a daughter, Diana, 11 years old, mature beyond her years, independent, and sharp-tongued, unless you're her dad, her grandmother, and holding an ice cream cone. She doesn't care. She lived with us full-time. Her mother moved to Texas before the divorce was final, leaving the child behind like an unwanted suitcase. When Diego and I decided to try being a family, I naively believed it was possible, that adults were capable of building something new. That children, even with difficulty, would adapt, understand, and forgive. Love should conquer all, right? Or at least that's what the movies and books told us, which I, as an adult woman, somehow still believed. At first, things were indeed going well. We rented a small apartment, a bit cramped, but cozy. I worked, he worked, the girls went to the same school, fought over markers, made up, and drew on the same sheet of paper. He wasn't perfect, but he was stable, and after my first failed marriage, that's exactly what I dreamed of, peace, a man who wouldn't disappear. But then everything went wrong. Diego was laid off. The restructuring, as he said, was nothing, temporary, but this temporary stretched on for months. I started working overtime, lugging my laptop home, counting pennies, writing reports until midnight. Still, there wasn't enough money. And then his parents showed up, with their kind advice and an offer to move in with them temporarily, until you get back on your feet. When I heard this, something inside me sank. I knew nothing good would come of it. His mother and I had never been close. Let's just say we're not soulmates, I joked. But there was too much truth in that joke. She could say sweetheart in such a tone that it felt like an insult. But I couldn't afford to just pay the rent, so we moved to their old, creaky house in a quiet Illinois suburb, with a swing on the porch, a flag on the lawn, and an unshakable belief that grandchildren are divided into us and them. I told myself it was temporary, that everything was under control, that we could handle it, that love, patience, and the right words could sort everything out. And yet, even then, deep down, I knew control was slipping away like water through my fingers. Then came a business trip, a routine one, like hundreds before it, 4 days in St. Louis, standard meetings, endless reports, coffee from plastic cups, and boring evenings in a hotel where the only entertainment was the hum of the air conditioner. But on the 4th day, business ended earlier than I expected, and suddenly I longed to go home so desperately that, without a second thought, I changed my ticket and returned on Saturday instead of Monday. I imagined opening the door, the girls rushing toward me, and us having a little celebration, ordering pizza, turning on cartoons, building a blanket fort right in the living room, and Nicole would laugh her loud, slightly raspy laugh, and Diana, trying not to show her amusement, would smile anyway. I wanted something simple, homey, and warm, but when I walked into the house, I was overwhelmed by silence, not the cozy evening silence, but a strange, wrong one, as if something had died in the house. I called out, Diego? Girls? But the only answer was a trickle of water from the kitchen faucet, and there, in that empty, too-clean kitchen, I saw Nicole. She was kneeling, wearing an oversized t-shirt pulled down to her knees, scrubbing the floor with a rag, alone, 9 years old. Her hair was stuck to her cheeks, and she looked so small, as if time had rolled back and the person standing before me wasn't a schoolgirl, but a toddler who couldn't tie her shoelaces yet. Nicole, I called, cautiously, as if afraid of scaring her, where is everyone? She raised her head and, without changing her expression, answered calmly, almost indifferently. They went to the park, I'm under house arrest. Simple, matter-of-factly, as if she were saying it was Tuesday or that the juice was out, and there was no offense, no surprise, no protest in her voice, only weariness, as if she were already used to this, as if this wasn't the first time. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, feeling my insides go cold. I didn't scream, I didn't throw things, I didn't make a scene, like in those movies where the heroines break plates and tear up photographs. No, I just acted, smoothly, calmly, without fuss. I gathered our things, mine and Nicole's, folded the documents, and took the keys. I left a note on the counter, you left a child home alone, called it punishment. Took your real granddaughter for fun, my daughter will never stay in this house again, and that was it. We left. I rented a room at a cheap motel by the highway, smelling of detergent and old air conditioners. We ordered pizza, turned on cartoons, and I let Nicole eat a whole tub of ice cream, even though I usually scolded her for it. She sat on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, laughing at the stupid jokes in the cartoon, and I just looked at her and tried not to think, not to speak, to be there, silently, like a shield. The phone rang nonstop, Diego, over and over, voicemails, messages. They were home, they saw the note, they knew I knew. He tried to explain, speaking quickly, haltingly, making excuses. It's just strict parenting, Dia, we weren't far, we just went to the park, Mom just wanted the girls to understand boundaries. Really? I asked, when I finally answered, Diego, are you telling me that discipline is leaving a 9-year-old alone while you all have fun on a roller coaster? Silence, long, awkward, thick as glue. "You know my mother," he finally managed to say, "she just wanted to teach them some order." "Order?" I repeated, "That's not order, that's cruelty." He tried to object, but I'd already hit decline. I didn't want to hear any more. I didn't call his parents. Why? Everything that needed to be said had already been said, everything that needed to be done, I'd done. And then there was silence, the kind that doesn't thunder, but seeps slowly, like water from a leaky faucet. I began to notice how Nicole had changed, not all at once, but gradually. She still smiled, but her laughs had become shorter. At lunch, she no longer sang her silly songs about rainbows and unicorns, or talked about how Tuesdays weren't even real days because there shouldn't be anything boring between Monday and Wednesday. Now she simply ate silently, and there was something wrong. Unsettling about the silence. I remembered how, when we first moved into Diego's parents' house, I convinced myself it wouldn't be long, just a rough patch, a couple of months, no more. He'd find a job, we'd be on our own again, everything would go back to normal. We're adults, right? And adults get by, cope, and don't lose their heads. The first few days were awkward, tense. His mother greeted me with a smile that made me want to take a shower, polite, cloying, like the smile of someone pretending to be welcoming but already mentally cataloging your flaws. His father sat in a chair, like the background noise of a TV turned down to low. "You know it's there. But it doesn't matter. I hope you'll be comfortable, dear," she said, showing me the room. "We've done all we can. We understand, it's probably hard for you to adjust to a real family." A real family, I simply nodded then, but something inside me snapped. The word lodged somewhere between my ribs, and I knew it would come back. Living under their roof was like trying to navigate a minefield in ballet slippers, carefully, gracefully, smiling, but with the constant fear that something might suddenly snap under the thin soles. "Smile, but not too broadly, it'll look provocative. Don't put the mug there, it's not its place. Don't open the window after 5 o'clock, unless you want to summon a tornado straight from hell," as my mother-in-law put it, waving her perfectly manicured hand. Everything had a rule, everything had a hidden meaning, as if life itself were built on someone's long-rehearsed stage. I tried to be polite, perhaps too polite. I said thank you more often than I breathed, smiled even when I wanted to scream, and tried to convince myself that patience wasn't weakness. Only later did I realize I'd confused tolerance with submission. Diana adapted instantly. She got her own room, with a poster of her favorite singer, a separate shelf in the bathroom, a special chair at the dining room table that no one dared sit on. Everything around her seemed to scream, "She belongs," and Nicole was assigned to share a room with her. And I was happy then. I thought the girls would become closer, start being friends, learn to share. But 2 weeks later, Nicole quietly, without a fuss, moved to the sofa in the living room. "Diana doesn't sleep well," my mother-in-law said simply, without looking me in the eye. As if that explanation were exhaustive, I wanted to object, to ask why my daughter should suffer because of other people's whims, but I only smiled, because I didn't want to be that woman, an annoying, clingy, drama-inducing second wife. And then the money came, or rather, the lack of it. It turned out Diego's parents had taken out a second mortgage and couldn't keep up with the payments. His mother received a tiny pension. His father worked 2 days a week at a hardware store, just to keep from feeling old. Their credit history was deeper than any bankruptcy. Thanks to some failed business idea 10 years ago, Diego still didn't have a steady job, getting by with odd jobs and promises that everything would get better any minute. And guess whose steady income and clean credit history saved them all? Mine. The mortgage was in my name, their house, their rules, but my money. On paper, it was a contribution to the family, but in reality, I was paying for a house where I felt like a guest. Emotionally, it was like paying rent to people who had insulted your child and then politely advised you to smile more often. But I convinced myself again that it was temporary, that we were a team, that we could cope. I still believed in this illusion, as if faith could replace happiness. Meanwhile, Diego's mother began her exquisite masterclass in passive-aggressive parenting. She would never have allowed herself a direct rebuke. No, that would have been too vulgar. she acted subtly, femininely, with that marbled calm that can hurt more than a blow. Gradually, she simply distanced Nicole. At first, it was little things, brief glances, feigned indifference. The phrase, "maybe you should go play, dear," said with a cold smile. I began to notice that Nicole laughed less, stopped drawing, her room no longer filled with the smell of paint, and there were no more colorful drawings on the refrigerator. Then strange stomach aches appeared before school, complaints about headaches, about how boring it was. She began hiding her handiwork in her backpack, as if ashamed of something she had once been proud of. One day, I asked, "Why haven't you shown Grandma your new drawing?" And she, without looking up, shrugged. "The house looks dirty enough as it is." I froze. It sounded too adult for a child, too alien. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just a bad joke, that I was making it up. I told Diego. He shrugged too. "Mom's just tired, don't take it personally." And then came the ban on sweets. First the cookies disappeared, then the chocolate. When I asked where they were, my mother-in-law answered without the slightest hint of embarrassment, "Some children do better without sugar, especially hyperactive ones." I knew who she meant. Nicole stood nearby, biting her lip, as if trying not to cry. And then came Diana's birthday, a big celebration, with balloons, candles, gifts, songs, and laughter. The whole house was filled with guests, and only Nicole sat quietly in the corner, clutching a card she'd drawn herself. I walked over, sat down next to her, and put my arm around her shoulders. "Are you okay, honey?" She whispered. "Grandma told me not to touch anything and not to disturb anything." Later, after the guests had left, I spoke to Diego again. He sighed wearily, his eyes still on his phone. "Mom's just a little strict. She wants the best for us. She just doesn't talk to Nicole that way. It's not malicious." I looked at him and thought how easily he'd said those words, how habitually he'd justified someone else's cruelty, and how hard it had become for me to breathe in this house, where my daughter's every breath was perceived as a violation of the rules. Of course, it wasn't malicious, just slowly, gently, gracefully, as if toxicity could be served up in a lace doily to make it look decent, almost noble. That's exactly how it all happened, under the guise of care, under the guise of proper upbringing, under the guise of everyone trying. I worked hard, took on projects that others didn't want, stayed late, held conferences from hotel rooms with air conditioners humming outside, and I kept telling myself it was all for us, for Nicole. To maintain the illusion of stability, even if it was as fragile as thin ice, an illusion is also a defense, until you fall through it. And then a letter arrived from her teacher. It was ordinary, short, but it contained something that made my fingers go cold. "We're concerned," she wrote. "Nicole seems withdrawn and tired. She barely talks to the other children." I reread it several times, not believing it was about a different girl, my Nicole, who used to be able to talk even to a pigeon at the bus stop. That evening, I sat down next to her and asked, "Darling, is everything okay?" She shrugged and was silent for a long time, and then, without looking at me, she quietly said, "Maybe I'm just being naughty." I didn't immediately understand what she meant. "What do you mean?" I asked, and then she added, still in the same even voice, "Well, they try, and I ruin everything." I felt as if someone had punched me from the inside. "Who told you that?" I whispered. She shook her head. "Nobody, it's obvious." I hugged her, whispering that she was wonderful, that it wasn't her fault, that she was loved, that I loved her. She listened silently, with that look in her eyes you see in children after a long rain, when everything is soaked through and even the tears have stopped flowing. And then I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and for 40 minutes just sat on the floor, staring at the white wall, trying not to fall apart. From that evening on, I started listening more carefully, and what I heard slowly burned into my heart. I heard Diana, in her teenage voice, say, "You're not in charge here, we have our own rules." I heard his mother whisper to Nicole, "Just don't touch her things, honey, you don't want to upset everything again, do you?" And I saw Nicole shrink from those words, as if she were getting smaller with each sentence. It cut me to the core, but, as often happens, I told myself, "Hold on a little longer, everything will work out. After all, I am a mother, I can't just walk away." Walking away would be admitting defeat. I worked overtime, I paid their mortgage, I bought groceries, I lived in a house where I couldn't even put a cup down without causing discontent, and all the while, Diego kept repeating, Gaia, you're making things more difficult, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. I tried to explain to him that flies don't mop the floor on their knees, that humiliation is not a method of discipline. He looked at me with tired irritation. As if I were hysterical. It's discipline, he said, it's order. My mother was always like that, and you? I asked. He fell silent, then quietly added, it's hard to be in the middle, just try not to make a big deal out of it. Try not to make a big deal out of it. These words felt like a death sentence. Apparently, my daughter's dignity didn't matter much. My salary, bought by a house where we weren't loved, didn't either. And I almost believed him, almost allowed myself to close my eyes, until one day I came home early. It was a warm, bright day, and without warning, I opened the door, and heard that same silence again. Nicole was kneeling in the kitchen, mopping the floor, alone, 9 years old, and I realized that everything was repeating itself, that nothing had changed. Everyone else was riding roller coasters, laughing, eating cotton candy. So that's what good-naturedness looks like, it turns out. The first night at the motel was rough. Nicole and I drove there without even looking back. I bought her vanilla ice cream, her favorite, the one her grandmother had forbidden for health reasons. We turned on cartoons, but she barely watched, just sat there, hugging her knees. I sat next to her, put a pillow under her, pulled her close, and we just sat like that for a long time, 4, 10, maybe 15 minutes, until our breathing became even, and then she looked up at me and whispered, Are you really not going to give me back? I replied, Never, you're safe now. And then she began to cry, not the quiet, careful tears she used to have when she tried to be a good girl, but loudly, heavily, with sobs that shook her body. She cried as if all those months of learning not to make noise, not to disturb, not to be in the way were ebbing away. I hugged her tighter, stroked her hair, and whispered, You're a good girl, you don't deserve any of this. It's not you, baby, it's them, they're broken. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I, too, was starting to mend, slowly but surely, right along with her. She began to speak, not all at once, not with the effortless ease of words that children utter, but in fragments, as if each sentence had to be pulled from deep within, where pain and shame lurked. First, Grandma called me a guest, then, Diana said I wasn't really part of the family, and then, as if a dam had burst, everything poured out of her, long, haltingly, with sobs, with pauses in which I heard not only her voice but also echoes of all those evenings when she sat alone, quiet, trying to be comfortable. She told me how she once wasn't given a piece of birthday cake because, as her grandmother said, she didn't deserve dessert, how she sat in her room, listening to laughter and music from below while they were throwing a party for Diana downstairs, and no one even invited her. I thought, she said, wiping her nose with her sleeve, that maybe I just shouldn't disturb it. I listened and felt something crunch inside me, like a branch breaking under the weight of snow. Does it ever happen that you just stop being an adult? When you want to scream, throw things, break dishes, smash this fragile world to pieces, but you can't because there's a child next to you, and that child is your true family, the only living thing that keeps you standing. We stayed in the motel one more night, just to breathe, just to feel like we still have what it takes. I went to the nearest store and bought her a new set of markers, those bright, strawberry-scented ones she loved, and a heart-shaped pizza, and some chocolate milk, cold and thick. We drew for a long time, silently, but with each stroke it was as if we were getting our breath back. She drew a house, with a rainbow roof, with windows where 2 figures were visible, and at the top, in neat, childish letters, she wrote, This is our home, and underneath, Here I am, my love. And as I looked at this drawing, I felt my throat tighten, as if there was a lump inside me that I couldn't swallow. And only when I saw her smile, a real one, not forced, not apologetic, did I realize it was time. I did what I should have done months ago. I sat on my bed, opened my phone, and logged into my bank's app, and I turned off my mortgage autopay. It was simple. Swipe, enter your password, and hit done. No dramatic music, no words, just silence, clear and pure, as if someone had finally turned off the background noise inside me. Then I texted our lawyer briefly, "I want to get out of our jointly co-signed mortgage." He responded almost immediately, "You'll need some paperwork," I gathered. Everything I needed and sent it off. He said it would take a few days, but everything would be sorted out. And then I went to the police. Nicole and I sat on a hard plastic chair, the air smelling of coffee and paper. I told the officer everything, how my 9-year-old daughter had been left home alone, how they'd called it punishment. At first, he just wrote it down, then asked, "What state?" "Illinois. You realize this is illegal?" "Now I understand," I replied. They asked a lot of questions. Who was the adult? How long the child had been alone? Had this happened before? I answered calmly, without trembling, as if I were in a work meeting, because if I let my voice break, everything would fall apart. Finally, the officer said, "We'll assign a social worker and open a case." Simple, matter-of-factly, without any big words, but to me, it sounded like, "You're not alone." When we returned to our motel, I ordered another pizza. Nicole turned on cartoons, laughing quietly, but without fear. I scrolled through the news on my phone, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I felt the room was free of tension, no strangers' glances, no expectation of reproach, only peace, just the two of us, without pretense, without rules, without their shoulds. A week passed. That morning, I learned that a letter had appeared at Diego's parents' house, an official notice of a late mortgage payment, a warning of possible foreclosure. I knew it would happen, but when the phone rang, my heart still sank. "Gaia, what the hell have you done?" Diego screamed, his voice trembled with panic and anger. "You want to throw my parents out on the street?" I was silent for a few seconds, then answered calmly, clearly, "I don't want my daughter to ever again scrub your kitchen floor while you eat hot dogs at Six Flags." He started saying something about it not being their fault, that I was being cruel, and then I said, "You're right, it's not just their fault, it's our fault, for allowing them to treat us like this, but now it's going to stop." And in that moment, I realized, I really wasn't coming back, neither there, nor in the life where I should have earned the right to peace. So there you have it, a real hysteria, a real, adult one, with loud words, accusations, and tears, but not on my part. His mother called me from someone else's number, screaming as if I had personally burned down their house, as if I had destroyed their sacred family, which, as it turned out, my daughter had never been a part of. She screamed that I was a monster, that I was poisoning the girl's mind, that I was depriving Diego of his daughter. And then, just an hour later, a message came from his father, short, hoarse, saccharinely offensive. "You're brainwashing a child." I looked at those words and felt a strange calm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't shaking, I simply ignored it all. I had more important things to do than answer grown children accustomed to confusing power with love. I needed to help Nicole heal. We found her a school psychologist, a kind woman with a soft voice and patient eyes. I took time off work to be there. We walked through the park, ate ice cream, laughed at silly cartoons, made dough figures like animals that didn't exist, and I began to hear her laughter again, real, ringing like a bell when the heart is pure. We breathed deeply. When the social worker finally showed up, a polite woman in glasses and a formal suit, Nicole told me everything, without trembling, without childish sobs, just the facts, as if she were speaking a truth that had been stuck in her throat for a long time. She told me how she tried to be good, how she thought maybe it was all her fault, that if she were a little quieter, a little more careful, a little more obedient, she would finally be accepted, and how she was afraid to tell me because she didn't want me to be upset, didn't want to ruin everything. And then she looked at me and, holding back a smile, said, "But now I know I'm a good child, because you said so." And in that moment, everything inside me stopped. No guilt, no doubts, just a clear, transparent thought. I did the right thing. She knows she's loved, and no one will make her doubt it again. At first, of course, they tried the old-fashioned let's make peace ritual. Diego showed up with a bouquet, lilies, just the way I loved them, only now the smell made me nauseous. His mother brought a cake, the same one she baked only for Diana's birthday, thickly dusted with powdered sugar. His daughter brought Nicole a new toy, a stuffed unicorn with crooked eyes. They left it all on the porch. I didn't open the door. I just watched through the curtain as they stood there, awkward, polite, as if nothing had happened, and then, when they left, I bagged it all up and threw it in the dumpster, feeling no regret. A few days later, Diego started showing up at Nicole's school. At first, he'd just hand over a notebook with horses on the cover, a box of chocolates, and a note, "We miss you." Nicole brought everything home silently, and that evening, putting the things on the table, she asked, "Can I throw them away?" I nodded. We threw them away together. The paper rustled, as if exhaling. But he didn't stop. He began waiting for us at the school exit, as if he were just passing by. "We need to talk," he said, coming closer. "I didn't know, Gaia. I swear I didn't know. Mom went too far. It all happened so fast. I miss you. I love you. I understand." His voice trembled. But not from sincerity, from fear, from a loss of control. I listened to him exactly once, just once, because I understood one thing. He wasn't talking to me. He approached Nicole, leaned over, trying to hug her, thrust a new toy into her hands, a little horse with golden wings, and quietly said, "Remember how we went to the lake? You laughed so much then." Nicole took a step back, looked him straight in the eye, and quietly, without shouting, said, "You stood there when they laughed at me, and that was it." That sentence was everything, both a sentence and a farewell. I turned to him and said, "You have no right to go near her anymore." He gasped, "Why?" As if he still didn't understand. I answered calmly, without anger, "Because you can't make a child feel like an outsider for years, and then show up with a pony and baked goods, hoping everything will be forgotten. That's not love, Diego, that's manipulation, and I won't let anyone mess with my daughter's head anymore." He started reminiscing about how everything used to be fine, how, before we moved in with my parents, we were happy, and I simply looked at him as if he were someone from another world, and thought, were we ever happy? Or did I just always hope that someday this would happen? He looked away, then whispered, I didn't know how to protect her." I looked at him calmly, without pity, and said, "You knew, Diego, you always knew." He didn't deny it. He simply stood there, staring at the ground, like a boy caught in the act of something shameful, like he'd stolen gum at a gas station and now didn't know what to do with his hands. His shoulders slumped, his fingers nervously playing with the hem of his sleeve, and it suddenly became painfully clear to me. Everything I'd once seen in him, strength, determination, reliability, was just a mask, thin as dust on glass. I said calmly, without theatrics, without anger, because everything inside me had already burned out. "I've filed the application. There's a temporary restraining order in effect now. He and his parents can't approach Nicole without my permission. Anything he says could be used in the Crown Prosecution Service investigation." He flinched, as if my words had burned him, and started shouting something, clawing at the air, trying to drown out the silence, but I simply closed the door, slammed it in his face with a sound reminiscent of the final period in A Letter That Will Never Be Continued. When it finally dawned on him that I had no intention of returning, no intention of withdrawing the application, and no intention of bailing out their mortgage, they went on the offensive, as always, stealthily, from behind their backs, with someone else's help. His mother filed a counter-report with the Crown Prosecution Service, and I wasn't even surprised when I received the notice. She claimed I was mentally unstable, incompetent, that I was causing Nicole emotional harm, that I left her alone in the evenings, and that she often seemed frightened, and the main thing is that they say, raised her as their own, and now I, the ungrateful one, am tearing the child away from the only stable home she knew. In that report, I felt like I was reading an entire play, casting me as a hysterical woman, a woman on the brink of collapse, unable to cope, fleeing her own shadows. They portrayed me as an exhausted, wrecked mother who had dragged her child from love and safety into chaos and uncertainty. But I wasn't afraid. The Crown Prosecution Service called me, and listening to the calm, official voice, I thought, finally, everything was going according to the rules, not according to gossip and family intrigue, but according to the law. I was ready. I had a letter from Nicole's teacher, in which she wrote that the girl had become calmer, more attentive, that she had made friends, and her grades had improved. I had certificates from the school psychologist, neatly typed sheets, with the words written in black and white. The child's emotional state is stabilizing, positive dynamics are being observed. I had a doctor's report that Nicole was healthy and showed no signs of stress or neglect. I had financial records compiled by my lawyer, clearly showing how many years I'd supported Diego's family, how I'd paid their bills, the mortgage, groceries, and medical care for their children. And finally, I had the police report, the very one filed the day Nicole was left home alone. But the main proof was Nicole herself, her voice, her calm confidence when the social worker asked what was going on. CPS listened to her attentively, like an adult, and for the first time, they took this little girl seriously, the same one who once thought she didn't deserve a piece of cake, the one who said she wasn't good at being good, the one who remembered her grandmother saying, "Your mother already talks to you. Don't make things worse." The worker came to their home. I knew it would happen, and I waited for the report, imagining the scene unfolding. Predictably, as if from a pre-written script, Diego's mother opened the door, her face full of feigned sorrow and virtue, like an actress suddenly finding herself on stage in front of a jury. She smiled too broadly, spoke too kindly, tried to be better than everyone else. She claimed that Nicole was difficult, that I was constantly traveling, that she, poor thing, was only trying to discipline the girl, and then, casually, she added, "She's doing all this out of spite. Gaia is just taking revenge." Diego's father, as always, stood to the side, silent, gray, like a backdrop against which others fade. Diego tried to take the blame. "I was under pressure, I failed, I didn't know how to do it right," he said, clenching his fingers into fists. But when the employee asked him directly, "Who left the child home alone? Did you know about it?" he fell silent, and that silence was louder than any confession. The results were immediate. An official investigation by Family Services was launched. Their home is now under surveillance, with social workers investigating not only their relationship with Nicole but also Diana's lifestyle. Diego received official notice. If the conflict continued, he could be temporarily stripped of custody, and this wasn't just a formal warning, it was serious, especially considering Diana's mother had long since ceased to be involved in her life. If Family Services decided this was an unsafe environment, they would intervene, and perhaps for the first time, I felt that justice wasn't an empty word, but the quiet, steady breath of truth that could no longer be stifled. And then the calls began. At first, the voicemails were sparse and persistent, as if someone still hoped to bring back something that had long since turned to dust. But very soon, a rage appeared in these people's voices, sticky, hot, poisoning everything around them. In one voicemail, Diego's mother screamed so loudly that her words choked on their own despair. "You destroyed our family. You ruined everything because of one mistake." Her voice was saturated with accusation, as if it wasn't their coldness and arrogance that had scorched everything alive, but I, who had dared to say enough. A couple of hours later, a message arrived from Diego himself. I didn't open it, not because I was afraid, I simply didn't see the point. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and kept copies. As required, everything had to be documented, so there was no room for doubt, ambiguity, or excuses. A few days later, a second letter arrived from the bank, stern, emotionless, with cold, machine-wound words. "One more missed payment, and foreclosure proceedings will begin. No more deferments, no more grace periods. That's it, the end." And, as if hearing this fateful decree, they intensified their pressure. They called, wrote, knocked on the door, begged, threatened, accused, cried, all in a circle, always with the same words, only louder and more desperate. I didn't open the door, not because I couldn't hear, but because I'd finally learned to remain silent when necessary. Nicole was frightened, pressed herself against me, and asked, "Will they come here?" I hugged her, stroked her hair, and quietly said, "You're safe now." She nodded, believing me, because for the first time in a long time, it felt true. Diego's last voicemail was pathetic. "You could have stopped this," he said. "We can work this out, we're still a family." I listened to his even, almost pleading voice and suddenly felt a strange emptiness, not malice, not anger, just weariness, deep and quiet. I replied calmly, the way I always say when everything is already decided, "We're not a family anymore." and I didn't ruin anything, I just stopped paying for your mistakes. Almost a year has passed. The house we once temporarily moved into, the one that smelled of someone else's soap and someone else's memories, is now empty. It's been repossessed. I learned of this by chance, scrolling through online classifieds. The photograph shows the same shutters, warped, with peeling paint, the same cracked steps, the same windows from which I once looked out at my fear and helplessness, only now, a large red sign hung above the door, sold as is. Diego's parents are now renting a trailer on the outskirts of town. They say it's temporary. However, 6 months have passed, and the only thing they seem to have regained is the ability to complain. Diego lives with them. He texts occasionally, but I don't respond. Everyone has their own form of punishment, and silence is the most honest of all. As for me, the case against me is closed, unfounded. All the evidence has been corroborated, all the words have been compared, all the false accusations have crumbled to dust. Nicole wasn't traumatized. Nicole was safe. Child Protective Services issued Diego's family an official warning. One more incident like this and action will be taken. It sounded almost solemn, like a sentence pronounced not in a courtroom, but in real life. Now we live in a small apartment. It's not perfect, but it has what matters most: peace, our peace. Nicole now has her own pony blanket, colorful stickers on her closet, and a small room where no one tells her she's not a real family. We got a cat, lazy and fluffy, and Nicole named him Pepper. We planted beans on the balcony, and as they sprouted, Nicole said, "I want them to grow free, like us." I work from home, pick her up from school, we go to meetings, read books in the evenings, and laugh at the cat trying to catch a sunbeam. On weekends, we bake cupcakes. Sometimes we go to the zoo, sometimes we just sit in the kitchen, drink cocoa, and remain silent, because that's a conversation too, without words, but about the most important things, just us, and honestly, that's enough. Sometimes I wonder, what if I had screamed then? If I had slammed my fist on the table, let myself get hysterical, burst into tears, and fallen at their feet, as they were expecting, maybe they would have stopped me, persuaded me to stay, hugged me, and then Nicole would still be scrubbing the floors, trying to earn their approval. But I didn't scream, I just got up and left. I walked out of their lives as quietly as they tried to erase my daughter from their memories, and now everything is fine. And those who thought I would put up with this forever were wrong. Are you asking if I've gone too far? No, I've simply reached where life begins. What do you think? Did I do the right thing? Write to me, I have more stories, and maybe you'll recognize yourself in them.